Hello friends, welcome back to my YouTube channel. Today's video we are going to talk about hooks in React. Hooks have been introduced with the functional components rather than the class-based components, but they are very useful for storing state of React or how the component is actually using the state, and we could store values and retrieve values or update the state. Uh, Hooks are actually the functions that let you hook into React state and lifecycle features from the function component. So that means hooks cannot work inside the class-based components, and there are certain inbuilt hooks that React provides, like for example, useState, useEffect. useState is a very kind of a common one which we'll use to kind of store the state of any component. For example, how many times a button is clicked, or you want to store the value of, let's say, drop down combo box. And use effect hook can be used for just like we have class based components, we had component did mount, so we could use the initial, let's say, an API call or data loading from a database or any API, and then we'll pass it on to the component to actually get it displayed. So this video we are going to see how we could use the use state hook and how we could use it with the help of different components within the React. So let's get our hands dirty on this and see how we could actually use the useState hook within the React component. So for the first thing, what you need to do is you need to use and import the useState from React. That's how you could actually hook this useState within the React lifecycle and component. Now, fundamentally, we can use this by setting it, let's say, const, and I want to have, let's say, a counter, and then I just want to say a set counter, a function that would set it, and I'll pass on as a use state, and let's say 0 is the by default value for that. So we are setting up a kind of a variable which would store the state of this component. This is known as a counter. I defined it as a counter. The function, I'm defined it as a set counter, which would actually kind of update the state of this counter variable, and it's actually being initialized with the use state, and the initial value is 0. Now let's say I want to have a button which could actually use this and kind of go from there. So let's say we have a button, input type is equal to button, we'll say on click, and then we'll say, let's say, event, and we say there is a function that would be called which would be, let's say, any function, let's say test function. Okay, now test is a function which we are going to use, and let's say class is equal to button primary. I'm just gonna do a bootstrap class. So let's go back and check it out in case if we could use that. So yes, there is a button out here. Now I have to give the value for that. So the value is, let's say, click me. And if we use this, okay, so there is a click me, you could start clicking out there. But now what we really want is we want to actually go with setting of the hook, like a state variable which we have set it around. So we'll use that, and how we are going to use it, I'm just going to use the value of counter over here, which is, let's say, I'll just use h3, and I'll pass a counter variable, which is perfectly fine for me. Now if you use this, so this would be the value of 0. And why it is the value of 0? Because we initialize the counter variable as set counter, and the use state is initially having a 0. Now on the click of this button, so what we are going to do is we are going to call a function called as test. So we'll go here and we'll create a new function, let's say function test, and then we'll say set counter, and I'll say counter plus 1. Now set counter is a function which I'm using, and I'm using the variable counter, and I'm incrementing the value by 1. Now if we go back and refresh this is automatically refreshed. Now if I start clicking this, this would actually go on moving on like +1, so it picks up the state value of that counter variable and then keeps on adding 1 to that. Now the function which is doing here is test. We defined it, a test function we call it, and then it just uses the set counter, which is used to set the state of a variable, counter variable, to increase it by 1. So it picks up the previous value and then keeps on moving that. And if we refresh it, yes, the state is always set it back to 0 because we have refreshed the component, so the state set backs to 0. And then if we want to click again, it would again start doing that. So this is how. Now let's see how we could use the same use state, but for, let's say, capturing the value of a text box. Now let's say I want to have a text box with where I'm capturing the employee name or some name, something like that. So I'm gonna name it as employee name, and then I'm gonna have a function called as employee name, set employee name, and the initial state is going to be empty because I don't have a name at the start. Now here what I'm gonna do, I'm just going to use input type is equal to text, and class name I'm gonna use, let's say, form control, and I'll say name is equal to employee name, and then I'll say value is equal to, the value would be employee name. That's what the state variable is. We're going to use that. And then in case if something changes out here, so what we are going to use is we are going to use the event, and then we are going to actually pass on that set employee name. I'm going to use the function directly, and I'll say event dot target dot value. Now what happens is, so whenever you are making any change in the text box, it is actually recording and overwriting because we are using the set employee name as the state variable function. So we change that, and then it is actually being displayed and even stored in that value. Now what we could do is we could actually have another button, let's say, which could show all the values out here, so that we can see the values out here. So we'll just use a button, and I'll say on click, let's say this button is gonna use a function called as, let's say, show state values, something like this, and I'm just gonna close this. The value is going to be show, and let's say the class name is button, let's say warning, something like this. I'll use this class, and let's see if it actually prints that or not. So okay, compiled with an error, show state values is not defined. Yes, we need to define this function, so we'll copy that. We'll go over here and we'll use a function with this name, and we'll just simply do console.log, and the value of counter is, let's say, I'll print the value of counter, and another is console.log the value of let's say text is so you print emp name, right? Okay, that makes sense. Let's go back. So we'll refresh it. Okay, we'll clear this out. So let's click firstly this one, so this makes the counter ticking, and then we'll type on some here. Let's say I'll type my name, Rohit Hunt, and now if I click on show, so it says this is the value which is getting from this counter, that's the state, and the value of the text box is Rohit Hunt. So if I change that, let's say I changed it to Vandana, so that's it's show. If you click that, so yeah, the counter remains same, but the values keep on changing. So this is how you can use the hooks to store the state of the function component. There could be multiple, let's say, HTML components for which you want to store the state. So you could hook them out like this. So you actually use a use state, which we have discussed in this. In the next video we'll discuss the use effect also, how we could leverage the API calls and other initialization. But this is fundamentally, you could actually hook it into any component, and in fact you can not only store strings or let's say this kind of a value, you could also store an object on change of something, because you want to store that complete state. So I hope guys this video is gonna helpful to you to understand what hooks are and how we could use those hooks in the functional components. And please do remember that the hooks cannot be used with the class-based components. So I'll be coming up with more videos in the coming time. So if you have not already subscribed to my channel, please do subscribe it and click the bell icon. And I hope everyone is fine, and please stay safe wherever you are. Thank you.